warm welcome to episode 6 of the Realise Mindfulness podcast, where we explore the topic of mindful compassion. Today, our focus is on giving and receiving compassion, and we'll end the episode with an adaptation of a traditional Tibetan meditation practice, which means just that, receiving and giving. As usual, we'll also share some of the ideas underpinning the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course, and I'll offer a shorter practice, which today is a reflection on our shifting identities in life. Our longer practice today is a compassionate breathing practice. It's a beautiful meditation, which can be offered as a longer practice, as well as a short in-the-moment response to the challenges of life. In Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living, we call the practice compassionate breathing, and it's inspired by the Tibetan practice of Tonglen, which literally means receiving, giving. Perhaps the words of St. Francis of Assisi could be a helpful frame for our session as we contemplate that. It's in giving that we receive. Before we dive into the topic of giving and receiving compassion, let me offer a short disclaimer. The MBCL course was developed as a support to deepening your mindfulness practice and assumes you've already spent some time building mindful foundations. So, if you're new to mindfulness, you may find it helpful to start by listening to Season 1. And if you're ready to explore mindful compassion, let me acknowledge that the MBCL course is rich and deep, and this podcast is in no way a replacement for attending an 8-week course. Rather, it is intended as either an introduction, or maybe a companion or a refresher for the course. And if you're interested in finding out more, I've included some helpful links in the show notes. So, without further ado, let's continue with today's theme of giving and receiving compassion. We'll begin by talking about our sense of self and the pitfalls of getting over-identified. And we'll explore how mindful compassion can help us loosen up and gain a wider perspective, creating healing potential for our relationship with both ourselves and others. One habit that can cause a great deal of suffering in our life is sometimes called selfing, a way of thinking where we over-identify with our own position, whether that's a sense of who we are, perhaps involving entitlement and an us and them mentality, or perhaps a sense of self-judgment, or maybe blame and recrimination to ourselves or to others. When we over-identify with a sense of self, it's hard to connect to others with empathy and understanding. It can result in a narrowing of perspective, so we cease to see things clearly as they are and focus on one limited viewpoint. This story may be a helpful metaphor to bring this to life. So I invite you to take a mindful pause, feeling the body settling into the chair, the weight of the feet firmly planted on the floor, and maybe taking a few slow, conscious breaths. So, once upon a time there was a castaway, fighting for his life in the rough seas. Becoming very exhausted, he manages to grab onto a piece of driftwood. Now he can keep his head above the water with less effort, and he catches his breath. But when the sea calms down, he feels how cold he is. He begins to look around. After a while, he sees a large barrel floating in the distance. He decides to let go of the driftwood and swims towards the barrel. With relief, he lifts himself up onto it, and the driftwood's already forgotten as he feels his body warming in the sun. Time passes, and he realizes how serious his situation is. He's drifting all alone on the barrel in a vast ocean. He begins to look around and spots an empty lifeboat on the horizon that must have become dislodged from the ship before it sank. Without deliberation, he lets go of the barrel and swims in the direction of the lifeboat. He's already forgotten about the barrel when eventually he manages to grab onto the boat and climb on board. How fortunate, he thinks. And even the oars are inside the boat, along with a small parcel of emergency provisions. As he eats and drinks, his strength begins to return, and he starts to row in the direction where he suspects that there might be land. Finally, his effort is rewarded, and he spies an island. He uses the last of his strength to row towards the shore, and as he reaches dry land, he pulls the boat that saved him up onto the beach. Then he notices a village in the distance, and without a second thought, he turns his back on the boat that saved him and begins to walk. He deeply longs for human contact and has already forgotten about the boat. What does the story say to you? I'm struck by the fact that if the sailor had clung on for dear life to the plank, he'd have missed his opportunity to eventually find dry land. We can all hold on to old versions of ourselves in this same way, resistant to let images of ourselves go, and in this way presenting ourselves from fully stepping into our potential. In the words of Lao Tzu, when I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Think of all the identities that you hold in your own life. Personally, I'm a daughter, a friend, a wife, and a mother. I'm a self-employed coach. And right now I'm a student studying for a master's degree in mindfulness-based approaches. So which of these identities is the true me? Or do they all go to make up the complex jigsaw? Which am I most tightly bonded to? Are there any that I push away and resist? So, an invitation to take a moment to pause now and reflect on all the different identities in your own life. Maybe some of these identities evoke a sense of joy, pride, and fulfillment. And maybe some give rise to a sense of anxiety, guilt, perhaps sadness for times past, or things that didn't materialize as you'd hoped. So seeing if it's possible to shine a light of kindly awareness on the entirety of your experience. Maybe taking a moment to savour any pleasant emotions, sensations and thoughts that are present. Perhaps you can clearly see yourself performing a particular role that brings you and others pleasure. Tuning into the sounds around you maybe as you perform this role, or sensing into what's present in the body. What smells or tastes might be involved. And how can you appreciate the ideas and understandings that support your connection with this role? And if more difficult things arise, then maybe shining a lens of compassion, sharing a kind wish for yourself, such as, may I allow myself to be with this emotion, or may I fully embrace this part of myself, or maybe, may I let this identity go, be free, to create space for a new incarnation. And perhaps bringing a hand to the heart or elsewhere on the body and allowing relaxation to arrive in any way that's accessible for you right now. Maybe through sensing the body supported in the chair, feet resting on the ground, hands quietly resting in the lap, or perhaps by following the flow of the breath and allowing a soothing breathing rhythm to emerge. And then tuning into a sense of what's present for you right now in the body, the thoughtscape, the emotional weather pattern. This short reflection may have given you a sense of how you relate to your many different identities and to which are most present for you right now. In this way, we can kindly acknowledge all the different facets of our identity, with an invitation not to cling too tightly to any of them. Perhaps we can even begin to get a sense that identity is not a solid and fixed construction, but rather flowing, ever-changing and evolving, a representation of passions, capabilities, and different ways of showing up in the world. In the words of Christina Feldman in her beautiful book, Boundless Heart, with only a little investigation, we come to know that self is not a noun, but a verb, an endlessly changing process, shaped by conditions and by what is being identified with in any moment. As an experienced coach, I specialise in supporting people through transition, whether that's relocating to a new country, adapting to the evolving roles of life, or to coping with loss. I spent a number of years of my life working supporting new parents in making the psychological transition to parenthood, and I recognise both how challenging and how rewarding this transition can be. It can be a particularly liminal time for new mums or the stay-at-home parent as they face decisions or are faced with not having any choice about whether to return to full-time work. Whatever our situation, this time requires some adjustments to our identity. For example, if there's a prolonged period of absence from the workplace to focus on parenting, it can be difficult to connect with this new identity. I remember myself, as I was faced with redundancy during my first period of maternity leave, feeling bewildered as to how I was to introduce myself now to new people. What did I do? And what did that mean for who I was? Our role in society is often tied up with our profession and status in the Western world. So what could I say I did now? Was I a job seeker? Or was I a full-time parent? And if I was just a parent, notice the air quotes around the just there, was that okay with me? And if it wasn't okay, did that make me a bad mother? I could have benefited from mindfulness and compassion practice at this stage in my life, but it wasn't to be part of my life for a few years yet. So I navigated the growing pains of new motherhood as best I could. And it motivated me to train to work with other new parents, supporting them through their own transitions. In fact, the first time I really encountered mindfulness was on a year-long training to become a mum and baby yoga teacher. Mindfulness was introduced as one of a range of meditation practices, and it piqued my interest. But it wasn't until a few years later, when we moved to Luxembourg back in 2013, that mindfulness became a regular fixture of my life. One of the ways mindful compassion can support us to live with more ease is by supporting us to loosen up the grip of self-judgment and self-recrimination. In turn, this can help us be more open and accepting of others. There are many beautiful exercises and practices threaded through the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course that help us focus on both giving and receiving compassion. In some practices, we direct our kind intentions out to others, and other practices involve offering kind wishes from a wise and compassionate part of ourselves to a part of us that's hurting. One of these activities, compassionate letter writing, takes place in session 5 of the course. We begin by embodying compassion, just as we do in the practice at the end of episode 5. And then we call to mind a time when we were struggling. By connecting with our compassionate self, we're then able to share a supportive message to our suffering self. We won't cover the exercise in detail here. Rather, I'll signpost you to the workbook. Or of course, you may prefer to join a group course or work one-to-one with a qualified teacher like myself. All of the supporting links you need are in the show notes if you would like to try this exercise for yourself. Through this, and the many compassion practices threaded through the MBCL course, we can begin to be kind to ourselves for our human habits, acknowledging that over-identification is simply an ancient survival strategy originating from the threat and the drive modes. We can also learn to relate more kindly to others, recognizing our shared common humanity. Eric van den Brink, co-creator of the MBCL course, who I spoke with in episode 1, has this poem by the poet Trina Srimasera hanging on his office wall. Perhaps it would be easier for you if you could remember people back as children, for whom once a mother lay awake. A father, proud as a peacock, took them for a walk, whose little finger caught in the door, who cried and cried over a grazed knee, and that once sat in the first class, a pencil far too big in their little fist. These words are a poignant reminder of our common humanity and our shared human vulnerabilities. Our relationship with mental constructs about both ourselves and others can be rigid or automatic, and in this instance most likely a source of pain. Or they can be flexible and mindful, and potentially a source of joy. One thing that will influence this is from which part of ourselves we're looking, and which part of ourselves or the other that we're looking at. Compassion practice enables a perspective shift, seeing a care-needing part of ourselves or another from a wider caregiving perspective. Due to the form and the length of a podcast episode, compared to the standard 2.5 hours of an MBCL session, I've taken certain liberties with the flow of the sessions as we explore them together here. And I've also had to make some difficult decisions about what to include and what to leave out. Wherever there are things that would benefit from further investigation, I've often tried to signpost a link in the show notes. And I would like to say that the workbook, entitled A Practical Guide to Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living, is also a wonderful, wonderful resource, and one I return to again and again. One key aspect of mindful compassion that those of you who are familiar with the MBCL course may be waiting for are the loving kindness practices. Loving kindness is a backbone of the course, and every week we share kind wishes with a different person or group, starting with ourselves in week 1. We expand the circle of concern in increments, week by week, moving to a benefactor, a dear one, a neutral person, a person we find difficult, and eventually expanding the web of inclusion to include groups and all beings. To create space for some of the other practices, I've decided to leave the loving kindness sequence for later in the podcast and to offer it as a whole. If it's a practice you'd like to explore before then, you may like to revisit season 1 of the podcast, where I share a befriending practice in episode 8. Today, our longer practice is a wordless version of a loving kindness practice. This can be particularly supportive if we find it difficult to connect with the wishes of loving kindness, or find ourselves getting lost in the words. The practice we'll share today originates in the Tibetan tradition, where it's called Tonglen. This translates as receiving, giving. In the MBCL programme, we practice a secular version, which we call compassionate breathing. It's a practice which asks for a dose of courage, as we're invited to work with our own suffering in an intimate way. We can also engage in a playful and a gentle way, in this way caring for ourselves. During the practice, we're invited to breathe in what hurts, breathing in our suffering, and to breathe out what heals. We can also offer the practice to others, breathing in their suffering and breathing out the antidote. At first it can seem counterintuitive. Why on earth would we want to breathe in what hurts? If this is the case, maybe it can help to think of it a bit like a meditational flu jab. Just like our physical immune system grows stronger by having to deal with small, manageable doses of germs or toxins. Likewise, our emotional resilience can strengthen when we allow what hurts to enter our heart and to be received and transformed. The practice encourages us to recognise that we can deal with something difficult at the same time as calming our threat system. And also we can give away something desirable whilst calming our drive system. we learn to deal with our suffering in a non-selfish way, and we shift from a self-centered ego system into a nourishing ecosystem. In this way, the practice can help dissolve the over-identifications we spoke of earlier. So, in a minute, we'll join together in a longer compassionate breathing practice of around 20 minutes. But it's also helpful to recognise that there are many opportunities to practice compassionate breathing in daily life. For example, when we meet suffering in ourselves or other people or animals we encounter, we may not always know how to respond or the right words to help. In such difficult moments, we can practice compassionate breathing, maybe informally as another variation on the 3-minute breathing space. It can be an empowering practice when we feel powerless, enabling us to do something valuable, however modest, with a mindful and a heartful intention. A breathing space with compassionate breathing may look a little like this. So beginning with step 1, being present with open and kind awareness. Then in step 2, allowing a soothing breathing rhythm to emerge. And in step 3, breathing in what hurts and breathing out what heals. Rather than formally guiding a short practice now, let's move straight into our longer practice for the session. So, finding a space where you can be comfortable and undisturbed for the next 20 minutes or so. Let's practice compassionate breathing together. This is a compassionate breathing practice. It's a gentle adaptation of the Tibetan practice of Tonglen, and in it you're invited to open to yourself and your experience in a wholesome way, intimately receiving what hurts and generously giving away what heals. So, like all practices in our Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living course, beginning with a settling into mindful presence. So, choosing a comfortable posture and deciding today whether it will be most compassionate to practice while you're sitting or lying. And as you settle into your chosen posture, tuning in to where the body's in contact with whatever surface you're resting on. A sense of being supported and connected with whatever you're sitting or lying on. And maybe a sense of releasing and letting go of the weight of the body a little on the out-breath. A sense of allowing gravity to do its work. And noticing what's here in the body. What thoughts are present. What mood states and emotions. And as best we can, creating space for it all, and maybe inviting a gentle attitude of softening towards the body, of soothing towards the emotional landscape, and allowing thoughts to be just as they are. when you're ready, you may like to bring the attention to the breath, allowing a soothing breathing rhythm to emerge. Knowing that you can return to this soothing rhythm at any point during the practice. And there's no need to force the breath or to attempt to breathe in a particular way. Simply allowing the breath to flow all the way in and all the way out. Following the breath as it flows freely. Allowing the body to open all of its pores to receive the in-breath. Being filled on the in-breath and releasing, giving away on the out-breath. In this way, every breath cycle becomes an effortless exchange with the environment. A welcoming and an offering. A receiving and a releasing. And if you maybe notice the threat or the drive system showing up, perhaps there's a sense of striving, of wanting it to be a certain way or not wanting it to be a certain way. And simply acknowledging that and as best you can, allowing mindful presence and a soothing breathing rhythm to return. Or maybe returning to another chosen anchor if that's more stabilizing. Perhaps a sense of body on chair or feet on floor. Or if you're lying, the whole of the back of the body supported by the surface that you're resting on. And now an invitation to imagine that you embody compassion in all its aspects. That you embody a sense of inner peace, of openness, of compassion and resilience. And that in this way you can be on your own side with kindness. Here for yourself. Able to be with whatever's present in a kindly way. And then an invitation to choose an area of suffering in your life. And choosing something that you feel you have the space to work with right now. So remembering that idea of the big boulder or the pebble or even the grain of sand. So maybe not picking the big weighty boulder, but perhaps choosing a pebble on the beach or even a grain of sand to work with today. And it may be a physical pain or it may be an emotional or psychological pain. And allowing your imagination to simply play with this. And then imagining that this area of pain or suffering is standing in front of you, if you will. And exploring what it looks like. Does it have a colour or size or shape? And how do you relate to it with your other senses? Sounds or maybe smells, aromas. And what felt sense does it evoke inside you? How may it be if you reached out to touch it? Let yourself be surprised with what your imagination offers. So exploring this area of pain or suffering in front of you. And then likewise, imagining a healing quality. What would offer balm and soothing to this area of hurt or suffering? And exploring all the sensory qualities and attributes of this healing quality. What does it look like? The size and shape? Does it have a sound or a smell? How does it make you feel? And if you reached out to touch it, what sensations would you notice? And now you're invited to do something that may at first seem a little strange. You're invited to imagine that you could breathe in this area of pain or struggle, allowing it to transform inside you into a softening, healing quality, which in turn you breathe out. And allowing this to happen without any effort, letting your imagination do the work. You don't need to try hard. Allowing for an attitude of curiosity and playfulness. So, for example, if you breathe in darkness, then you may breathe out bright light. If you breathe in a particular colour, you may breathe out its complementary colour. So breathing in red and breathing out green, or breathing in muddiness and breathing out clarity. Breathing in one quality and breathing out its opposite. So we may breathe in a sense of heaviness and breathe out lightness. We may breathe in coarseness and breathe out smooth. Breathing in rough and breathing out soft. Breathing in heat and breathing out cool. Breathing in dissonance and breathing out harmony. Maybe breathing in fatigue and breathing out vitality. You can also inhale a dark emotional atmosphere, so maybe anxiety, anger or sadness, and exhale a light emotional atmosphere of comfort, tranquility, joy. Simply breathing in what hurts and breathing out what heals. And noticing whatever arises, and if you get a little bit stuck or distracted in the practice, you can always return to the soothing breathing rhythm. Simply allowing the breath to flow freely. Or if it's more supportive, then returning to another familiar anchor. A sense of body resting on whatever surface is supporting you. And you may even notice the threat system coming on board, trying to use lots of energy to ward off the unpleasant. And if so, then simply noticing, acknowledging, and coming back to the soothing rhythm of the breath. Or you may notice the drive system kicking in, wanting things to be a particular way, trying really hard. And again, simply acknowledging your experience and kindly returning to the soothing breath. Just allowing the breath to freely flow. And when you're ready, you can return to the imagery practice. Breathing in what hurts and breathing out what heals. And if you notice a lot of resistance, then taking good care of yourself. You can always choose something less painful to work with. Or you could even choose to practice with the resistance itself. Breathing in resistance and breathing out acceptance. Breathing in struggle and breathing out ease. Breathing in striving and breathing out ease. You could even experiment with visualizing the resistance in front of you, imagining its qualities in the same way we did earlier. And as you perceive these qualities in front of you, then you can breathe them in, changing them and softening them as you breathe out. And there's also an option to add in some mindful movements. We can extend the practice of compassionate breathing to include mindful movement. Stretching out our arms to the pain in front of us, And then with every in-breath, moving our hands in a receiving gesture towards the heart. And on every out-breath, extending our hands in a giving gesture. In this way, we can connect the movements with every breath cycle. Imagining breathing in what hurts as the hands come towards the heart, and breathing out what heals as we open the hands and arms wide. And maybe alternating between practicing with and without the movements, as is most supportive to you. And kindly exploring the effects that this practice is having on you, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Noticing how it affects you. What's present in the body right now? What thoughts are present? How is the practice affecting the emotional landscape? And knowing there are no right or wrong experiences, just kindly opening to your experience as it is. And if you feel that you have the space, you may wish to explore another difficulty in a similar way. Breathing in what hurts and breathing out what heals. And now, as our practice draws to a close, letting the soothing breathing rhythm emerge once more, allowing ourselves to be gently rocked on the soothing rhythm of the breath. Coming back to a sense of the whole body sitting or lying here, from the crown of the head right down to the soles of the feet. Maybe a sense of the boundaries of the body where skin meets clothing, and a sense of air on skin around the face and the hands. Maybe an awareness of sounds in the room around you, or even beyond the room. And if eyes have been closed, slowly blinking them open, taking a gentle look around your room as we bring our practice to a close and move forward into the rest of our day or evening. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. It's my heartfelt wish that this podcast, in its own small way, contributes to the spread of mindfulness and compassion in our world. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and follow it. And if you have friends who may be interested, please share it with them too. And if you'd like to find out more about me and my work, including the Mindfulness-Based Compassionate Living group course and one-to-one coaching, you can do so at my website, www.realisemindfulness.com. Please do keep listening, and if you'd like to keep in touch, it would be wonderful to hear from you. So, until next time, wishing you ease and kindness in the flow of life.